Hi, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the move by a lot of black activists in the United States and actually in other parts of the Western world, particularly as blacks are being brought in large numbers into Europe, and they're demanding, their own special handouts and gimmies. The view of segregation, this is racial segregation, the view of segregation has changed. Since 1960, the idea was that black kids should go into white schools. There should be complete desegregation. There should be no separate black schools and white schools, or black classes and white classes. It should all be mixed in together, and this would create some sort of a utopia. Equity and equality and this sort of thing. And it's outrageous that blacks have separate schools. Now, the argument that they used back in the 60s was a sort of superficial moral one of, we're by separating the blacks and whites, we're being classified as an inferior people. And we don't want to be classified as inferior. Therefore, if we hang out with those guys, the white people, then we won't be inferior anymore. So it's a weird form of sort of relative inferiority, superiority, rather than anything that's absolute or clearly defined. There's some sort of just sort of fuzzy miasma of, well, if we go into their space, then we'll be equal to them, which will then make us not second class, which is, of course, absurd when you look at it. But you can see how at some sort of emotional level that could be considered as somehow a social step forward when there's nothing of the sort. Now, the other argument that was used at the time, again, we're going back to the 60s here. So we're talking in the US, at least the civil rights movement. Now, in other Western countries, there was hardly any black people anyway, so it kind of didn't really happen around the rest of the world. So it was somewhat unique to North America. But anyway, so what they used to talk about, and this was widespread, that white schools had much better resources and much more resources. Therefore, white kids had an advantage, or rather black kids had a disadvantage, school kids disadvantage, because the schools were very differently resourced. Now, again, this sort of failed to really grasp the essence of the issue. There was white schools in poor white areas, rural areas, poor white, where you'd say they were much more, they were under-resourced compared to white schools in better off areas. So what they did in order to create the most dramatic juxtaposition was they'd look at a white school in quite a well-to-do area, and then they'd look at a black school in a particularly poor area, and they just compare those two. Say, well, look at this, look at the difference. There you go, racism, fascist. And so this was an unreasonable. Instead of comparing a white school in a poor area with a black school in a poor area, where the difference really wasn't that much, they didn't make that comparison. They deliberately used a propaganda type comparison to illustrate what they put forward as the activists put forward as the difference, and that just wasn't real. Now, on top of that, they would show black students, I don't know if they were students or just actors or something, but they're black students running around with placards saying, we want to go to school. There was nothing to stop them from going to school. So the idea that they were somehow being prevented from going to school was nonsense. Were they prevented from going to a rich white school? That was the issue. And so they'd have these very well-dressed black kids, like senior high school students. So they'd have these very well-dressed, all the black males are all wearing suits and ties, looking very smart. The women are all wearing, very, very sort of, nice clothed jewelry, their hair perfectly done, and their nice designer handbags, and they'd be walking around. And they said, what's wrong with them going to a white school? Look at them. Look at how respectable they are. But that wasn't. that was far from being the typical black student. Far from it. Those were the boys in the hood. Those were the again artificially dressed up. So they tried to give the illusion that there's this vast sort of army of middle-class black kids who are bright, very capable students. All they want to do is go to school. Are you trying to stop them? You fucking Nazi. So that was the direction of the propaganda there. Now, the reality, of course, was quite different. Now, if you look at the inner city black schools as an example, the schools in the hood, as it were, no capable teacher or qualified teacher wanted to go there. I mean, it was a tough area. There was all sorts of violence, kids attacking teachers, and no teacher wanted to teach in those burbs. So the best quality teachers, or the better teachers, or the dedicated teachers, or the teachers that may rely on acceptance of their authority in order to impose the discipline necessary to be a successful teacher, that they wouldn't go to those places because the black kids just had no respect for authority or anything like that. So the teachers that were going to those schools were the worst possible teachers that in the end either didn't give a shit or would do the minimum amount possible. What's the point of getting Shaniqua to attend classes and do her lessons or something if it's going to end up in some huge drama and some huge carry-on with social services coming in. No one needs that aggravation. So now the other thing too is that and I've seen this firsthand, is that the black kids would help themselves to anything that wasn't nailed down. Not every one of them, but this was a common problem. So various bits and pieces at school would be like teaching aids or whatever would be taken, stolen, and copper wiring or the lead in the roof or the tile, anything that could be stolen was taken, and therefore the maintenance upkeep bill for the school was huge, and the school only had a limited budget, same as other schools did, by the way. But in the white schools, things weren't getting stolen, so that the budget wasn't getting tested because things didn't need to be replaced, whereas they were always having to be replaced and repaired in the black schools. So this meant that there'd be rain leaking through the roof. Now the propaganda is, look at this rain leaking through the roof here in the black school. That's not happening in the white school. Look at that, Nazis are in action. But the reality was that these things were being stolen. They just didn't have the budget because there was so much stuff had to be replaced that they just didn't have the budget to conduct these repairs. So they were doing the most important repairs first, and the leaking roof just had to wait until the next budget approval. So there was a lot of, and I've seen this sort of thing firsthand, as I've mentioned many times. I went briefly to a school that was, what can I say, very multicultural. It wasn't with black kids, but it was with brown kids, Arabs in particular, and the amount of stuff they were always stealing, and just the just the damage to property. There were kids going around with screwdrivers trying to take the screws out of all the desks. Why would you do that? They seemed to think it was some huge accomplishment. They were fighting back against the man or something. I never understood it. But whereas, in a decidedly non-multicultural area, so things like that, nobody even dreamed of doing that. Very different types of behaviour. And of course, we see that there in the United States, the black kids behaving very, very differently from the white kids. Anyway, so they do the desegregation thing, and it's considered to be, immoral in the extreme. So black kids and the white kids are put together, and of course, education goes downhill at a rate of knots across the board. So, there's recently been shown a PhD student today is dumber than a junior high school student in 1960. That's how bad, how much things have gone downhill. Again, this is across the board. So more recently, black activists have been saying, well, we want to. We want our kids to be around other black kids. We want to be around people that look like them. We want them to have black teachers. We want them to have 100% black experience. Black sports team and this sort of thing. So we don't want to be around those damn white kids because the media and the MSNBC and the Democrat Party tells us all those white people are Nazis. So we don't want to be around them. Who wants to be around Nazis? So Now, I saw a few interviews on TV on the video online here, from black teachers. Some of these teachers are like superintendent of the Board of Education in a district, and they sound like they've got an IQ of like 50 or something. I go, what? What, this is the superintendent? You're fucking kidding me. And then a few teachers get interviewed, and again, they're just shaniquas with an IQ of 80. And these are the teachers, for fuck's sake. And then there was a few parents, black parents on one side. No, look, I want to be, I want my kids to be in an all black class with a black teacher, but I want to have white school resort. I want, absolutely top of the town resources available for my kids. I don't want to hear that white kids have better or more resources. I want my kids to have the same resources as the white kids do, which is fine. Well, then you've got to stop your black kids stealing everything and vandalizing everything, and you've got to get them to pay attention in class. And what they really mean is, I want the same outcomes as the white kids get. That's really when you decide what they're on about. Well, there's all those white kids that go to college and they have nice houses and drive nice cars and I want my kids to have that. Well, that's fine too, but then they got to attend school regularly. They got to pay attention in class, and they've got to hit the books. And if that's it, no, I don't want any of that. I just want the outcome, for fuck's sake, you damn Nazi. So now, on the other side of this, one thing I noticed, that the first time I went to a multiracial school, which is a bit of a shock, by the way, I noticed that it became apparent that they divided them up by academic capability in those days. It might still do, I don't know. And so they probably don't. It'll be racist or something, elitist or whatever now. But they divided up by academic capability in those days, and it was strictly merit, pass or fail the test. If kids who came first in tests were in the top level, and kids that flunked the test badly were in the bottom level, it was just straight out merit. There was no racism or anything involved. And some of the tests were quite rigorous. I'm the top man. I remember I got something like 55% in one test, and like I came, second or third in the class. Like some of the tests were like really tough. So they weren't designed to let kids pass easily. Far from it. So anyway, the bottom class, and I think there were like eight classes in this particular year, and I think there was like 200 kids in this year, more than 200 kids. And the bottom class was nearly all brown people. Brown is a few black people, or very dark people. So it was Indians, it was Chinese, it was Arabs. That was the class. And some of the Arabs were recent migrants, so they still had Arabic accents, but most of them spoke with Australian accents. So anyway, the bottom class there was a few white people in it, but they had, I'm going back a bit here, and this is only my recollection, but they had learning difficulties, like they had, I don't know, I remember one kid had severe eye problems, and he had to put the book like an inch from his face to be able to read it, and things were pretty slow for him. But other one, they had all various health related problems which prevented them from being able to learn. I think you put it that way. That was the white kids, but the other kids didn't give a shit, and they would just run riot pretty much all the time, they sort of were strangely sexualized at a young age. Like, I mean, this is first year, some kid got an Arabic kid was up, and he was drawing tits and penises on the chalkboard and this sort of stuff. I remember thinking, holy crap, I would never dream of doing something like that. And again, they were stealing everything that wasn't nailed down, vandalizing anything they could get away with. And the police were around every day, and so on. So that was the sort of place it was. But effectively, racial segregation occurred once you separated kids by education at the time, academic achievement. So all the Indians and Chinese, Arabs, they're all in the bottom classes. So the bottom two, this is from my memory, the bottom two classes had hardly any white kids in it. Other than the dyslexic kid or something like that, there was just no white kids in those places. Now, and by contrast, the top classes were all white. So now this was a naturally, it's completely merit based. Now the activists around, or even at the time, I remember, or certainly in that, I was saying, well, that's in effect racist, because even though it's not directly intending to be racist, the byproduct of this action is racist. That people, the black people and the brown people are all at the bottom, and thus there's being segregated. Now, whether you want to call it merit, exams, or racism, or Nazis, doesn't matter. The outcome, as the activists saw it, was the same. So it was just the same as segregation in their view. So if you get rid of any segregation based on race, then you get rid of merit-based exams. Then you get rid of the requirement to pass the exams, and you get rid of any requirement to behave or be studious or academic. Or if you get rid of all of that stuff, then you can have the perfect utopia, is really how the activists play the cards on this one. But again, it's gone full circle. So now, if black people want to segregate, no, I don't mind. It makes no difference to me. Is there better behaviour? Is there the difference between going into a class, and I've noticed this as a kid, the difference between going in a class with all white students and mostly non-white students. The difference is, their universes apart. They're not just sort of a couple of degrees off centre. So the universes apart. The majority non-white class is continual mayhem, and this is in the days of corporal punishment, by the way. So there's none of this detention bullshit. They drag you out and give you the cane, this is something that didn't seem to affect the brown and black people viewed getting punished as that they just have to be smarter at not getting caught. That's all. And the idea they should change their behaviour never even crossed their minds, which I found remarkable. Why wouldn't, if you're getting punished for that behaviour, why wouldn't you just stop that behaviour? But they just didn't see it that way. Well, I just didn't get away with it this time. That was their attitude. So in the wider mix of segregation and what it means, and how it's interpreted and how it's seen through a lens of sort of Marxist social justice is very different. And as time went on, and even in the all-white school, and as time went on, the teachers, very much teachers' unions, very leftist activists, they still viewed equal outcomes as being more important than the quality of education. So you can see all the ingredients necessary for a sharp decline in educational rigour and merit were already being baked into the pie back then, and it simply continued, so that we're at the place we are now, where the whole education thing's gone to shit. You've been Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.